This is Mike Montero.
I'm Erica Hall.
This is Larissa Berger. We're broadcasting from Mule Design Studio in beautiful North Beach, San Francisco.
This is Voice of Design.
What have you been doing this summer?
You know what I did get to do that was really cool in the process of dropping the teenager off at space camp in Huntsville.
Ooh, that sounds really fun.
Space camp.
Space camp.
I always wanted to
camp.
go to the real space camp, and my mom wouldn't figure it out.
Now you can join Space Force.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know.
But I interrupted your story.
No,
Yeah.
we took a side trip to the new museum and memorial in Montgomery, which was incredible.
Oh, wow.
And I think really good to take a couple of white teenagers, my
Yeah.
kid and her best friend, to go and see that. And they were really responsive. And I mean, I couldn't obviously help but respond. So that was my best trip of the summer so far.
Oh, that's cool. I've seen the photos and it looks just
It's
amazing.
Astounding,
Yeah.
overwhelming, but also
Rough.
rough. And also one of the best designs I've seen recently. That you can't take pictures inside the museum, which is kind of too bad because it's just an incredible educational design.
Mm-hmm.
The way that they present some really challenging primary artifacts and so forth. So,
Oh,
Wow.
but yeah, since we were going to Huntsville,
Mm-hmm.
it's only a couple more hours south.
Yeah.
Yep. Welcome to Voice of Design, everybody.
Hello.
This is Mike.
This is Erica. Are we not doing last names anymore?
I don't know. I mean,
I'm Larissa Berger.
It's Larissa Berger.
And our guest today,
We have a very special guest with us today, Cyd Harrell. Hi, Cyd.
Hi, Erica.
Welcome to the Voice of Design.
Thank you.
And well, I guess we can start here with our customary question. What do you think is the job of a designer?
That's a great question to say in a few words. I think in some ways the job of a designer is to be a pain in the ass for good.
No, that's a good definition.
That's how I interpret it in a lot of my jobs in any case. And to do it politely enough that they let you get away with it.
Yeah, walking that line. We always enjoy walking that line. And we were really excited to have you with us today because you've been, I won't say that you've been, I won't presume that you've been a pain in the ass in the public sector, but
I'm pretty sure some people would say so.
she's totally a pain in the ass.
Thank you, Mike. I feel
Everybody in this
validated.
room is a pain in the ass. Why are we being weird about it? Cyd, you've been working in the public sector for a while.
Mm-hmm.
You've been all over the place. You've done some amazing stuff. So here's my question.
Yeah.
So I'm a designer.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the private sector for a long time, working at companies, starting my own company, startups here and there, that sort of thing. I know how to get those jobs.
Yeah.
How the hell do I get a job in the public sector?
That's a great question. I'm going to actually name a bunch of segments for you because compared to, say, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, there's a ton of opportunity where there actually will be a job posting and you can go apply for it.
And wait a minute, let's take an even further step back
Yeah.
to make sure that people understand what we're talking about. What the hell is the public sector? What are we talking about when we say the public sector?
Yeah. So economists, I think, have a specific definition that includes a bunch of things. But I think the reason that you all wanted to talk to me today was mainly about government at various levels, which is actually complicated, right? Because in the United States, we have a federal government.
We don't.
Well, there was a point when we did. It's in the Constitution.
In our Constitution, we
Right.
have a federal government.
Right. And then we have 50 state governments, and they have different responsibilities than the federal government. And then each of those states has a number of counties, and those county governments take care of specific things. In a big city like San Francisco, where we're all sitting, right, we actually have a unified government of the county government and the city government.
Right.
So do cities like Miami. So you always hear Miami-Dade County.
Mhm.
In places that are largely rural and less densely populated, the counties have a pretty important role. Like the sheriff is always a county employee. The counties run the elections. Counties maintain vital records, not cities or towns. So then you have your municipal, city, and town level government, and then you may have overlays of, say, water districts or other kinds of districts. So we all interact with multiple levels of government every day, even if you're just talking about the government as public sector. A lot of people, and I think economists would include universities, some would include arts organizations like museums and so forth. Some would include almost everything in the nonprofit sector as part of the public sector.
Okay.
Disney World is a water district, right?
I would not be shocked.
I think so. I think that's they set up a water district so that they could essentially run that part of
Control the
Florida.
whole-
Yeah.
Disney World is, I believe, a county.
Wow.
They've set up their own county. They have their own post office and their own zip code.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I know that
Florida.
that's not a one-to-one
Those
relationship.
things are federal.
Well,
Yeah.
but yeah, there is a Disney World post office.
Oh, that's amazing. And then
Yeah.
they have their special town as well.
Oh yeah, Celebration,
Celebration.
Celebration,
Yes.
Florida. Yeah, so I don't think that would really count as the public sector, though. Yeah, so I think we're particularly, I'd say, interested in government because the government does a lot of things, like as much as people who read a lot of Ayn Rand would argue against. The government, I think, does a lot of things that private companies can't accomplish for people. And there's so much focus on designers working and trying to do innovative things and save the world and do all that stuff and do good within the context of, a company that's set up to make money. And the reason we were interested in talking to you is because we've had some discussions about the fact that that's just not possible. Like there are problems that you need government to solve.
Yeah, I agree. And I actually think, scratch a Randian, you will still find someone who thinks that the government should tell them the best way out of town in a hurricane. It's like everybody has something that they think the government should assist you with. And there's a hell of a lot of negotiation around where that line is. But
Well, let's not forget that Ayn Rand wrote those books on Social Security.
right.
I love tossing that in at every opportunity.
I am so glad to give you one.
Yeah, thank you.
So we have all of these levels of government. And when I started nosing around about this in 2010, 2011, I could find one designer who was employed in a municipal government. And the guy's name was Chris Geiser, and he was working for the city of Raleigh. He's not a municipal designer at this point anymore. He's moved on. But now I see amazing things happening from designers that I have never met, don't know, who are working for cities around the country. So there's really been a movement to hire designers directly into governments. For example, in San Francisco, for a long time, there was a mayor's office of civic innovation that had a couple of people and people in on fellowships. But now there's a whole service design department under Carrie Bishop that is regularly hiring designers. Boston, similarly, New York has several departments that are doing it. Of course, these are big cities. And so designers who live in a big city have certain opportunities in those places. Aside from those, states are getting more and more into it. California has several things going on that you would recognize as design initiatives and design jobs. So there's the Child Welfare Digital Services. There's some work in the California Government Operations Agency, which just recently published a set of web design standards for California based on the U.S. web design system with, California colors and poppies. It's actually quite nice.
Where did the U.S. design system come from?
That was a project by two designers, one who worked at 18F and one who worked at USDS.
Okay.
When I say USDS, that's the United States Digital Service. And those are another category of public sector design job that people can consider. They're term jobs with the federal government where you actually are a federal employee. The digital service is largely based out of Washington. 18F is largely remote and people can work from anywhere. And designers Maya Ben-Ari and Molly Ruskin decided that the United States really ought to have a set of web design standards, much like gov.uk also does. And they did it as a passion side project and then managed to get support for it from those agencies. And it's gotten more and more officialized and built into work that's being done in the federal government. It's not a required adoption, but it's out there. If you Google US web design system, you'll find a really nice and flexible set of well-coded design elements that government agencies can use.
Yeah, that's cool because I think it's the gov.uk people were really doing the conference circuit for a while because they did such amazing work.
Yeah.
And they, I think, really helped raise the profile that, oh, yeah, like dealing with your government, you should have a good interface to government services.
Yes.
And nobody had really, I think, ever thought about that before because you just have this mindset of, well, everything's the DMV or the IRS and it's going to be terrible. And something happens with bureaucracies. And then they made, and of course the UK is a much smaller country, but they made that whole process so transparent I think that really helped kind of raise the profile.
I absolutely agree. And I also think that design still looks fresh and beautiful and like nothing else on the web. And we are 6 years on now. So that is really...
I remember going to conferences and everybody was like on acid about startup. And here come, these
British civil servants,
very very charming, very nice. And here they are talking about like, oh, we've made a design system for government. And people weren't ready to pay attention yet.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool.
Okay. And it really, so, when I talk about what opportunities you have, a lot of them came out of the healthcare.gov crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So
when you say crisis, what was the crisis?
So this was in 2013 when the healthcare.gov site launched, but did not work at all. And it was President Obama's signature initiative. And the fact that a failed website could potentially take down an administration was something that a lot of people paid attention to. Obama was well connected in Silicon Valley. And so he made some phone calls and brought in a bunch of people on temporary contracts to fix it. And there's a whole story, which is not my story. I wasn't part of it. But if you ever get a chance to hear Mikey Dickerson tell it, it's amazing, of rescuing that site and making it work and discovering what was going on behind the scenes. And a number of the people who participated in that rescue kind of caught the bug, in the sense of this affects not millions, hundreds of millions of people in a very profound way. How can I keep doing this? So there are several sort of what I call new school federal contractors that were started by people who were part of that rescue, who are looking to do ethical contracting for technology services with the government. So primarily off the top of my head, that's NAVA PBC, which is a public benefit corporation, Ad Hoc, which works largely on healthcare related stuff. Siberia is another one. And so you might, recognize those names and see some of those people out and about at design conferences, and they are working almost exclusively with the federal government, but trying to provide more of a, what you'd call an environment like you might have at any high capacity design and build shop where everybody's working sort of agile in small teams and designers are working in systems and designing in the browser and, things that would be very recognizable to a currently working designer.
Because a lot of what came out of that crisis, if I remember correctly, was that the government processes for procurement just didn't really suit software at all. Is that accurate?
That's definitely accurate.
I went to a talk by someone from 18F, and I remember there was something to that, but it wasn't exactly the healthcare scenario. They were talking about a different project.
Yeah, so there's been a whole big stream of people who work in civic tech focusing primarily on the procurement issue because it is really difficult. And I have worked on this more at the municipal level and the federal level myself. But if you think about it, there's a lot of knowledge in how to procure good design services. So if someone is to write a strong brief that would attract a company like Mule to bid on it, if they are not familiar with the design world and they maybe don't have the skills to state their design values or their design goals very well, and it comes out looking like a really bureaucratic RFP, a lot of firms are going to pass on that.
Yeah.
If it's not their focus to work with government.
We were never able to bid on those because it would take like another team the size of our current team just to do the RFP.
Yeah.
Just to do the RFP.
Yeah, because a few years ago, we went to an information session for the city of San Francisco for something, it was something in environmental or...
Oh, I know who got that actually.
Really?
Yeah. They still have the contract and they're terrific. And it's a local B Corp called Exigy.
Oh, cool.
Nice folks.
Yeah. So we went there to say like, because we'd love to make services in San Francisco better and more accessible because everything was terrible. And we thought this was interesting. And we knew other people at the information session. But the fascinating part was that the people who were like the sponsors of the project, who would be the actual clients, were great, lovely people who knew things about things. And then there was the procurement process. And I just remember there was an information sheet on my seat. I've been able to read English for much of my life, and I could not understand a single sentence of this information. I absolutely could not. And what we learned is that there were a lot of people who were already set up to contract with the city who were there to meet the people who could provide the services and then just essentially take 20% off to act as
that's the prime.
Yeah, as the prime. And that, we walked away from that like, okay, that would be
I don't blame you.
But we couldn't afford to. We couldn't afford to deal with anything like that.
So there are starting to be some strong local firms that do this kind of work that are sort of figuring it out. But when I've been talking with folks from them recently, it's still a hard business. And so one of the projects that I want to do, and maybe if I say it here, that'll increase my chances of actually committing to doing it, is band some of those people together so that they just can talk to each other. Because as far as I can tell, there's sort of one or two in each big town that are really combining that kind of, high capacity modern practice and also figuring out the government side of it.
Yeah, it's tough because the way that, and we've seen this with other, like we've worked with a lot of universities and large organizations, and the way that organizations are often comfortable thinking about and purchasing services has no relationship to how those services can be or should be provided. And that's a huge gap. I mean, at one point, 18F sent over someone to talk to me about in some sort of fact finding, like, this man is from the government and he wants to know what you look for in an RFP or in a contract, and just to learn about the process from our side. And that's such a hard gap to jump.
It's really tough on their side. And exactly what you said about there are people who know things about things, and there are really good people whose job, frankly, includes a lot of what we would all recognize as design decisions, and who make them as absolutely best they can, and often make decent ones, sometimes make really good ones, but just don't have the framework of design practice or design community to help them with that. So it's always great once you get past all of that and meet those people. But because of lacking that framework, they don't necessarily know, how do I write something to secure the work that I want? Right.
Yeah, because when you talk to designers or people working in agile processes, it sounds like you're buying complete vapor. You're just, there's no, like, you can't commit to anything. It's like, oh, we're going to think about this and we're going to solve your problem. But when you start talking about, oh, what concrete deliverables am I going to get on what date? And can I know that 2 years in advance? No.
But if I'm a steward of public funds and I'm going to commit money collected from people like all of us to doing something, it's a very, very scary prospect not to know that I'm going to get the thing at the end.
Where have you seen the kind of like evolution in thinking? Like, have there been breakthroughs in terms of, because I think that would also help anybody who's dealing with somebody from a more traditional organization. Because I know, Jeff Gothelf has been running into this, trying to sell like lean UX to people and getting people to change their budgeting processes to be more flexible.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a really long-term process. And if you can get people started with a little engagement. So that was something that we worked on at 18F, was we shrunk the size of our minimum engagement so that we could sell somebody something that was relatively comfortable for them and us if it didn't work out, which we were only able to do because we were working on interagency agreements, which are a lot fewer pages, let's say, than your typical RFP, and a lot less process, even though they would still take a number of months to complete. But I think it's exposure to it, and it's very easy to be insulated inside of government. So even though if I'm going into a government space, I am sort of the person entering and being the ambassador, the invader, however you want to put that, I still feel like it's on me to then open my practice and invite people to come in. And if I do that successfully, then I can start to help people see that, oh, okay, this is reliable. There are different words that are used to describe the outcomes that we're looking for, maybe, but they are real. This is a rigorous system. And this is something that we might be able to experiment with. And then if we have a successful experiment, it starts to look like, actually, we got a lot done for less money. That's a goal that I can take to upper government management. Because in government, you're always going to be hitting a level where the person is not design, I don't want to say competent, like design infused, not a huge...
Oh yeah, they don't have the domain expertise.
Yeah, thank you.
They have
other domain expertise,
which is running a government or an
Or an
agency.
or- yeah.
And which is very different from having, so it's like this, it's like a very, what's the word? Like it's a magnified case of dealing with any client who knows their business, doesn't know design, but it's huge because there is that responsibility. It's not like, oh, I've got to make this quarter profitable. It's, oh, I'm responsible for regulation or public health or.
And if I waste taxpayer funds, I can embarrass my agency and get personally sued. That's a real thing. When I was chief of staff at 18F, I bought personal manager liability insurance, as was recommended to me.
No kidding.
Whoa.
Just in case there was a suit. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't
Wow.
even think about that because most people we work with they're corporations,
Yeah.
which means whatever. We've got general liability insurance. We're a corporation with liability insurance. And so that idea of exposure at the not just the sort of fiduciary level, but the personal level. Yeah, that I could see how somebody would be more careful
With
with
a little risk averse.
procurement. Yeah, wow. That is a thing to know.
Yeah, there's also different ways, if I remember correctly, that like the decisions have to be structured. So you have to get like X number of bids.
Yes.
The bids have to be kind of meeting a certain. So you do kind of have to not only structure how you make the decision, but structure how you kind of socialize that decision, and people can actually like interrupt.
Yes.
that
And they can
process.
actually sue over an award that they believe was awarded wrongly,
Right.
like not fairly based on the criteria that you have set out in advance that you're going to use with a point system for the award. So writing, you have to write the full criteria of this is how we're going to rate each of the responses to the RFP. And you usually, I think it depends on the threshold and which level of government, but you quite often have to have different people write those from rate on them.
Oh.
But isn't that the process that got us in the healthcare.gov mess?
Yeah. Because the example that I saw was having to do with like hosting services. Like, I think what's interesting about it to me is that there are decisions that we take for granted working in the field, right? We're like, oh yeah, of course you would put your small static site on AWS, right? But that's not an assumption that you can necessarily ride in a government contract, because you have to explain like, these are the requirements for the hosting service that I decided on.
Yeah. I mean, there are a bunch of mechanisms, especially in the federal government, to make things easier, and some of them are successful. You're right that process that was exactly intended to steward public funds and ameliorate favoritism or any kind of bias in the process does also end up aiming you at people who are able to get through the process.
I mean, you take a process that's supposedly sound and you put it in the hands of people who maybe don't have the best or smartest of intentions, and it turns into a cover your ass process where everybody had their ass properly covered.
It's good when everyone
Yeah.
has their ass covered.
I want to talk about now.
Right.
I want to talk about, like, you got a bunch of designers out there wanting to help. And I've noticed this in the last couple of years. The desire to want to do something meaningful, I think, is now more important to a lot of people than the desire to make a boatload of cash.
Mm-hmm.
The public sector seems like a place where you can do something meaningful.
I think that's true.
At many of the levels that you spoke of, federal, state, county, city, et cetera. So if I had one goal out of this podcast today, it would be making sure that those people had a clear step one in finding out how to do that.
So I don't know if there's one. One of the best ones you can take actually is to look up your local Code for America Brigade.
We have one right here in San Francisco.
2 in the Bay Area. Actually, 3 if you count San Jose. Yep. Open Oakland is Tuesday nights. Code for San Francisco is Wednesday nights. And I can't remember when the San Jose group meets, but they're also weekly. All of those groups. Chicago Hack Night is the longest running one. There are over 1,000 meetings now, I think.
So you can just go to those and hang out.
Go to those, you hang out, you meet people. People notice in those groups, notice of opportunities. So if you want a single first step, that's a first step. And there's a code for Tulsa. This is not just hip biggest cities.
And are those
I
just
love you, Tulsa, you're hip.
Are those just opportunities within Code for America, or are they?
Oh, no.
Okay.
So the brigades are volunteer organizations. And they do a lot of work with their local municipalities. And they were started in 2012. So they've all now spent some time, normally at first sort of busting in the door, maybe to different reactions, but now they all have pretty good relationships with their local governments. And so if those are mostly municipal relationships, still the counties know if they have something to put out there, they should maybe send somebody by on Wednesday night to talk about that. And they all have mailing lists. And so people also send things that direction in regional context. And you just kind of get a flavor of the kind of work that people are doing too, and how that works. So that would be a first step to figure out what's going on.
That's a great one.
If you are interested in campaigns, that's another great way for designers to contribute. There are a couple of organizations that help. So Tech for Campaigns or the Ragtag team all help place people with campaigns. Not all of those are paid jobs, but again, if there's something that you care about, there's quite likely a campaign out there that needs a designer.
Okay. And that's Tech for Campaigns. Is that a website? Is that
Tech for Campaigns, I believe, is just techforcampaigns.org.
Okay.
And you got ragtagteam.org as well.
Cool. And so I think a lot of people right now might be concerned that, I want to, I believe the government provides important services. I want to help with that. What is the relationship? And this is, a sort of a complex question. What's the relationship between helping government and working with the particular administration in power?
It was so interesting to learn about that when I took a 2-year term, and 6 months into it, a very unexpected election happened. There's a dividing line between careers and politicals. And so term employees are kind of in a weird side of that. And
a term employee is you're an employee for X number of years.
X number of years, or sometimes even X number of months.
Can you explain why that is? That's specifically with 18F. We're discussing
the term.
Yeah, the term.
It's because of the specific hiring authority that they used, which is another flavor of procurement.
Okay.
So they were able to bring people in outside of Washington at specific pay grades, because they were able to use something called Schedule A, which has several parts. So some people were Schedule AA, some people were Schedule AR, and I can't say I know the difference. But it was a hiring authority that was set up to bring technologists in. And because of the way that the federal GS level hierarchies and so forth work, you can't just hire a bunch of people at the top of it as permanent people.
So you're in for a set amount of time and then you got to go.
Yeah.
It's like Menudo.
Thank you for the 80s reference. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So I did a 2-year term. There was the option to extend another 2 years. I decided I might do that 2 years in a few more years, just because I wanted to come back out and, do some work in my own time zone. So,
so you can go back. You can tack on another 2 on top.
There's not like a term limit for.
I don't believe on that particular authority that there is.
Okay.
It's complicated.
It's
Procurement, it's complicated.
Yeah, there's one thing you take away besides go to your Code for America Brigade.
Okay, so going back to the 2 types of, so there's the political
careers
people,
and the politicals.
The careers and the politicals. And the politicals are like come in with a particular administration?
They're appointed rather than being in place. So there's certain roles that are always appointed, like the heads of agencies. And you see this in other levels of government too, right? The, mayor comes in, there's a bunch of department heads that they appoint. Sometimes you have more contact with electeds, as they're called in the smaller governments. So politicals are there to implement a particular administration's agenda. Careers are there to keep the whole thing running and sustain it, whatever the politicals are up to. And there's some really interesting rules. So there's a thing called the Hatch Act for federal employees, which means they cannot use their federal position for politics in any fashion, which is sort of, you can't have a political sticker on your federal laptop. You cannot fundraise, you can't make a quick fundraising call from a federal vehicle. Even if you happen to be driving a rental car that day, it's just right out. You can't talk about who you wish would win the election in a federal building. You are allowed, like any citizen, to have opinions about a particular administration or official, but it's not, it's not in the best of taste to express them at work. And so federal folks have a wonderful way of not expressing that, but saying, well, the previous administration favored X, Y, or Z, expanding access to services, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
The current administration has a different view. And we're trying to sustain X or Y
Mm-hmm.
in the new administration. And so here's our plan to do that.
So it's like so it's like when they throw shade on British baking shows, you have to really understand how they do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you had chopped the walnuts finer, they would have been better distributed in this cake, which was like a view held by
The previous
administration.
Yeah.
And the current administration,
Right.
we don't really care where the nuts fall.
One of the important things about that is when somebody who is actually a serving public servant decides to resign in protest, that gets a lot of attention, especially if they're high level.
Oh.
Because they're used to working with different administrations.
Yeah, they
right?
do it all. I mean, I talked to people at GSA who had, were on their 5th administration change. Like, oh yeah,
Wow.
another presidential transition. This will be interesting, kid. And then of course this one was quite
Interesting.
off the scale of the usual definition of interesting, but they still have these ways to talk about it and feel okay about it. But I guess, the point I wanted to make about protest resignations is that's, it's kind of a bee sting power, right? You can only use it once.
Mm-hmm.
But if you do use it as a serving public servant, it has a lot more power than what you or I outside of government could do as a protest.
Wow.
So the fact that they're bought in that way gives them a certain, we've seen a few people from this administration do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to have that longer term view, because I think in contrasting what's happening, especially in Silicon Valley, with thinking about solving problems over the longer term, like most technology companies have a very short view. It's either until the funding runs out, or
what's the runway?
What's the runway? Or once if you IPO, then it's like quarter by quarter. And the idea that you'd be in there solving a problem through any admission, decades. That is,
and relationships take place over decades, professional ones.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in the private sector right now gets to throw any shade at people working in the current administration. Because when we see what's happening in the private sector,
oh yeah,
jeez,
there's
come on,
not much high ground to be had in places.
So Cyd, you were at 18F. You were 6 months in when the administration changed.
Yeah,
and then you went for another year and a half.
That's right.
What was that like? What did that do to you? And I know that you signed up to do a thing and you did it, and that's commendable. But it couldn't have been easy.
It had its hard moments. I think the day after the election in the San Francisco office, which I don't think I'll be shocking anyone by saying was a heavily Democratic set of people outside of the office, was very, very strange because everyone was shaken. Everyone was feeling very uncertain and no one could talk about it at all. And so until sort of 1 or 2 o'clock after lunch, when people started saying, oh, we can walk outside the building and take our badges off and talk about this. Let's go for a walk. No one quite knew how to process anything. And I think there were the sort of nightmare fears of what could have happened, right? Will we be asked to build the database of Muslims in the United States?
Yeah.
Nothing like that took place. I think that would have been a really easy decision to say, we're out.
Did you have a line like in your head? I'm not asking you what it was or anything.
Yes, I did.
You did?
I actually wrote one down. That was one thing that I thought was important, was just, but honestly, I do that with almost any job.
Yeah.
Fair
Totally.
enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, that's such good advice to designers, because I think that people don't make that a practice, and it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
I've always done that with every job, and it really helps, I think, when you're transitioning, no matter whether you work in government or business or even if it's your first job in your career, it gives a trajectory.
It does. And, the one time I had to use it, I was completely flustered, but I knew that I had written that down. And so I was able to say, that's my line.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't actually in this last government job. Yeah. So I felt good about that. I also felt that if I ever felt that I needed to resign in protest to draw attention to something, I'm a privileged person in a position of financial comfort with a partner who also works. So that was good. And I also am privileged to know a lot of people, probably could get the tech press to take notice, right? If I made a stink after leaving that job. And so I felt like if I hit that line, I would know what to do. And I didn't end up hitting it.
Were you still able to do good work?
Absolutely. We did a lot of good work. One instance, which I know is okay to talk about because I also talked a little bit about it at the Code for America Summit, good work was losing in the best possible way, preventing too much loss from something that was really cool that was being worked on. And then the current administration decided that they had a different perspective, in this case on an international coalition for reporting data about natural resource extraction. And so the team was able to, and largely through design work with partners in the agency, figure out a way that was congenial to the current administration to continue presenting this data, even if we were withdrawing from the coalition, which means that we have a lot more transparency into that than we would have if those people weren't in place, doing that expert design work on a question that was really uncomfortable.
Wow.
And now you're working for the state.
Now I'm
Correct?
working for the state. Yes.
The state of California.
Yes, the judicial branch.
How's that?
I love it. I'm still a couple of months in, and so doing lots of exploration, meeting folks. It's wonderful to be working in my time zone. And as with every government engagement I've done, I'm finding incredibly mission-oriented people who have decades of domain knowledge. One of the fun things about working in government actually is that I am almost 47 and I'm the youngest person in a lot of the meetings I go to. This doesn't happen a lot in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Also, people have decades of domain knowledge. People are actually smart, instinctual designers a lot of the time. And so if I can just provide them a little bit of what I know from my training and experience, I can often give them some superpowers. And the scope that really any government agency has, but in this case, the whole judicial branch is really involved in people getting to exercise their rights and getting to get what they need from governments or corporations or other parties. So if those people get a little bit better at design or a little bit more involved with design, assuming it's done well, there's a whole lot that can come out of that. So I'm excited for it.
That's cool.
So you went from federal to state.
Yep.
You're working for less people by definition.
Yeah.
But you're closer to them.
Yeah, that's right. So there's always been a trade-off because Code for America, where I worked for several years, works mainly with municipalities. So you're working for less people, but it's a lot easier for a mayor to take initiative than, say, a governor or the president.
Right.
So the mayor can say, this website is terrible. We're going to fix it this year.
Okay.
And a city probably has one main website, which encapsulates most of its functions. And so if you actually successfully execute that project, you've made a big difference in really what are a lot of people's main touch points with government.
Yeah.
Cool. But you've only made it for the people that are in that city.
Right.
So one of the things that CFA does well is try to connect cities together and have them learn from each other and adopt things that other people have done, get people to implement. But yeah, it's a completely different play.
You're kind of like centralizing something that's decentralized.
Yeah. And as a market, we were often constrained to work with cities sort of 100,000 and above, or maybe go down to 80,000 and above. And there's about 300 of those, if I remember correctly. Well, there's some 20,000 municipalities in the United States. And so that includes towns of, 500. Maybe the town of 500 doesn't have that many functions, but I can tell you the town of 15,000 has to do nearly as many things as the city of San Francisco in terms of just providing services. You're going to have parks, you're going to have safety, you're going to have a library, you're going to have all kinds of registrations, building permits. All that stuff is pretty much the same at the scale of 15 or 20,000 as it is at 1.5 or 2 million. And so whoever figures out how to help all those towns of 15 and 20,000 is going to do a lot of good and make a lot of money, honestly.
And do you think that the work being structured like that has to do with like the services that those governments are used to having, whereas like technology kind of scales differently, right?
It does. I mean, right, San Francisco, especially because it's a city and county, like the difference in budget and IT staff between San Francisco and Oakland is really, really substantial, even though San Francisco is only
That's
twice the population of Oakland.
Oh, wow.
And if you get even to a city of 80,000, they'll often have a 3 or 4 person IT department to cover everything from the printers to the website. So doing there you're really talking about a product strategy, right? Making some kind of tools that help those people do a great job because they really want to.
Right.
Yeah. And something that we've found that's sometimes a challenge is anything that touches technology, like a website, is conceived of as a technology project. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I see there's some recognition here.
Yep.
And we've had trouble when we come
All the
in.
joy just went out of everybody's face.
No, it's not joy. It's the joy of this particular challenge, because I think we've had trouble when we've gone into potential client organizations and said, well, you're talking about this like it's a technology problem, but the technology is really the easy part. The hard part is that it's like an organization and communication and prioritization problem. And that can be such a tough sell that we've had clients go with
somebody
technology.
who's just going to do what they say.
It's just going to do what they say. And we're like, oh, you're setting fire to money. Like, have you...
You're not going to be happy at the end of this, but you'll be able to say that you executed the contract.
Yeah.
Right.
So have you... Yeah. I'm sure you've dealt with that, but have you found a way
Why are you talking to us about getting along? We just want a Drupal shop.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
So I actually think that you, Erica, articulated something that I've been trying to articulate for years a few weeks ago.
Sweet.
I had to go hunting through your tweets. Because when I was working on municipal sites a lot, which was for a couple of years, and really thinking about what is a municipal website, one of the things that I came up with and kept saying to people was most of the current sites are about the government. And really what should be happening is that they should be the government doing the people's business in the online space. And that's a very different way of thinking about a website. And when you said the other week, website is a material, what can you do with website? Getting people to think that way makes a really big difference. And again, I don't really know a way to do it except having friendly and skilled people hang around with them.
It's got to be socialized. I mean, there's
that Atul Gawande article from a few years ago called Slow Ideas that I send to almost everyone who tells me they want to be in civic tech, that talks about, you say that human labor is not scalable, but actually if you want to scale an idea, the thing to do is send out just armies of people to make friends with people who are doing something the old way. And that's a lot of what I see myself doing a lot of the time is just, I have some advantages over some of the folks who try to go into this. I've got gray hair. I feel to a senior government person like maybe I'm someone that, I could go to lunch with her. That doesn't feel threatening, like there's some kid in here. And so then I can be really open about my practice and what I do. And, were you talking to customers? Have you ever done that? That's interesting. Yeah, that's actually something I've done a fair bit of. I mean, if you're ever interested in talking about what you do, or I'm happy to look over something for you, you just start to get into, and I think I make it really clear that I have a tremendous amount of respect for the domain expertise that they have in, whatever it might be, from GSA Schedule 70 procurement mechanisms to running a municipal parks department.
Yeah, I think it's very easy for within Silicon Valley for us to say these processes and procurement and even with Mule, this is just so needlessly involved and clearly is protecting the interests that are not ours. But on the other hand, there's a great deal we can learn from these longstanding institutions about how to slow down and how do you have slow knowledge. Like we've been working a lot with the Wikimedia Foundation.
I like that phrase.
Their CTO, she gave us that phrase that,
slow knowledge.
Yeah, Wikipedia has to be slow knowledge. And so you can't really easily compare it to other websites per se, because the point is that they're making this kind of lasting thing. And I think a lot of companies here don't have that goal.
Yeah, I've been trying, as I've been thinking about, not just government, but other institutions, like, okay, how do we know we're in an institutional space? What is that? And the thing I have right now is that it's something that acts not just at scale, but over time. And that brings a whole nother dimension into how you consider designing towards it.
Yeah, I think that's such an important concept. And it seems like every conversation about design is about this on-demand worlds that the internet has enabled, and nobody has patience for these things, and then wonder why like everything's broken all the time.
I've actually just recently been hearing about, people complaining that a complicated court process doesn't get done in half an hour because there's an expectation that, any efficient process takes a short amount of time. And
And so it's a combination of spending all your time on the internet and then watching courtroom dramas, I think, that have been streamed to you on Netflix. And you're like, why does the actual court? It's because it's still shocking when you read, oh, someone was arrested for a crime 2 years ago and the case is just now coming to trial. And then that goes, and it just seems like no one has their head at that.
Yeah. Judge, jury, executioner, let's do it all right there. Very quickly, very efficiently. Catch you, put you down.
So I think that's another...
We have been moving towards that model with some Americans.
With some,
yes.
Yeah.
The efficiency, which is such a god in Silicon Valley, is not always the right god and is often
absolutely correct
in opposition to resiliency.
Mm.
And institutions have to have resiliency.
Right.
So, it's someone, when I was working for the federal government, one of last year's hurricanes that was so bad, they put a call out for people to come and, spend some of their leave time and deploy out to help with just basically whatever needed to be done. And someone said something really disparaging about, this just shows me that government is totally inefficient and wasteful, that they have, all these people who can just take time off work and go do this. And for me, it sort of said the opposite. It's okay. Government is staffed. And it's staffed a lot less than it used to be, frankly, but it is staffed for peaks. Mm-hmm. It is staffed because sometimes you get 2 hurricanes right on top of each other in the same season. And like I said, almost everybody agrees that if there's a hurricane, the government probably ought to assist you in some fashion.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about the volatility of circumstances, which is something that we don't talk about being adjacent to Silicon Valley. It's always like it's up and to the right or something like that. But you don't think like in any complex system, there's going to be a lot of volatility, and and you want to be prepared for that, and you want to anticipate. I think there's an idea that you can't control things. Like it doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are.
Right.
I think there's maybe a little bit too much optimism in engineering that doesn't account for, people are a little chaotic. People at scale are super all over the place. Environments are unpredictable and uncontrollable. We can see trends.
Mother Nature is mad at us.
Yeah. Wow. California's on fire right now.
Yep.
And yeah, the idea that you can't just, that you can't predict and that you have to prepare is maybe a little anathema.
Well, I think what's weird is that maybe that responsibility for like preparing for those times has kind of fallen too far to the individual.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that was the role, and technology kind of shared in that, right? Like you think about the ATM as one of the first disintermediating technologies, and the main patents filed for the ATM are actually weatherproofing. It was like one of the most exposed elements of technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that was a priority concern, but then everything like moves into your phone, and now like whether your phone works in a volatile environment depends on you.
Oh yeah. But I got my stuff's in the cloud, whatever. Drop your phone, don't drop your phone. Yeah.
Your phone smashes in a scenario, it's on you. Like there's no entity saying like, oh, well, the copper wires.
There are starting to be these different phone contracts where it's like you get a replacement if you break it.
Yeah.
Because it's getting recognized differently, but only now, right? Yeah. 10 years into this. More than that.
I was in DC last week, and I got to meet with a friend of mine who has this nonprofit called EveryoneOn.
Oh, yeah.
And they were trying to get internet service as being a part of Lifeline.
How are they doing? Because that seems really important at this point.
Yeah, so EveryoneOn is a nonprofit, and they're focused on, I think, I'm going to screw up all the numbers because I don't have them in front of me. But there are, unsurprisingly, many Americans without internet service.
Yep.
And they do partnerships with different ISPs to provide affordable internet. And they define affordable internet as $10 a month, which surprisingly still gets a margin for ISPs because internet
I bet it does, yeah.
so horribly priced. And so, I think their big move was to get it included as Lifeline, which they almost did while Obama was president. And then that fell through. So they're doing all of these kind of, and their struggle is having these kind of specific partnerships. But it was fascinating to learn about because something about, if you see internet access as a utility, historically, I think this one I do remember, once you have over 80% of a market, then the private sector doesn't really serve. And it does have to move into a public space.
A kind of public utility space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like electricity was like that, all these.
I just want to make a side note that actually, if I could wish for one piece of data in the world, it would be county or local level internet access stats.
That doesn't exist?
Not that I can find, and I've been Googling for years. And I've been asking people for years. So Pew Internet in American Life is a tremendous resource at a national survey level. They produce it every 3 or 4 months. And it's very detailed. It's got, people who have challenged internet access, people who have phone-only internet access, things like that. But there's nothing for officials in a particular locality to know what internet challenges is my population dealing with and how should I think about that in delivering services.
So Pew has it in the aggregate, but they don't break it out like.
Well, they do national surveys, so they'll survey 800 people or something. Yeah. So that's a good representation of the national context, but it doesn't actually accurately represent the 3,000 counties.
County level internet access.
Yeah.
Wow. So if that sounds like a great project if people wanted to take that on, like for their
they have to get a lot of private company data because it's not publicly held data.
Yeah.
That's why Pew's doing surveys about it. So the providers have the data about how many people they serve in a particular area.
Oh, that's
internet providers are generally good people.
Totally.
And highly transparent.
Phone companies are even better.
Oh, that's great.
Wow.
Hey, Cyd, I want to make sure that you got to get back to work, right?
I do have to get back to work.
Okay. So I want to thank you for your time. I got one more question. It's going to be incredibly hard to answer. You've worked at the municipal level. You're working at the state level. You've worked at the federal level.
Yeah.
Which one makes the most difference? Feel free to answer any way you want.
Not just because I'm there right now. I'm betting on states in the next few years. I will tell you that the municipal level, states or counties, actually. So city, town level has the most direct touch points with people. They have police departments and parks and swimming pools and parking tickets and all that kind of stuff. The federal government, with respect to the average citizen, mostly provides funding for programs. There's a few direct touch points like the IRS and the passport agency and so forth. But states administer a lot of those federal programs and that federal money. And in that way, they can administer it very differently depending on the policies of the state. And states, I think, at this point are getting more into this and ready.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
California, at least.
Well, California is particularly interesting just because of its size, right? It's, it's closer in scale to the UK in some ways than the US is. And it often leads on things. So Californians, look out for those opportunities. I think they still have some work to do, with getting people to work off site, which is a big difference with the tech industry typically.
Oh, yeah. We had conversations recently about the difficulty of recruiting people to work in Sacramento.
Yeah, which is, it's hard to ask people to move. But there are a lot of
Gateway to the Sierras, people. Gateway to the Sierra.
How much work is being done in Sacramento to saucer section us the hell out of here?
I have no idea.
I
kind of hope none. Those ballot initiatives were actually sponsored by pretty scary people, from what I understand.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, I want California to be a leader of what we can continue to work towards.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, super. Well, thank you so much. This has been a great discussion, and we encourage anybody listening, if you have thoughts or questions about the job of a designer or how to get involved in that, send them our way.
Yeah, VOD rocks, VOD_ROCKS.
Cyd, thanks so much for coming in and spending your afternoon with us. And again, if you're listening and you're unhappy with where you are and tired of being in the private sector and tired of spending your life making money for people who are ruining the planet, consider going over to the public sector for a bit.
Come on in. The water is sometimes choppy, but absolutely fine. Thank you all so much for having me. This was fun.
Thanks, Cyd.
This has been The Voice of Design, and we're done here.
This season, we're asking the question, what is the job of a designer?
What is the job of a designer?
Send your responses to us on Twitter at VOD_ROCKS, VODROCKS.
Or you can send us an email to VOD, VOD @muledesign.com.